Chapter 10. I went to meet Kathy at the National Theater Cafe on the South Bank, where the performers would often congregate after rehearsal. She was sitting at the back of the cafe with a couple fellow actresses, deep in conversation. They looked up at me as I approached. "Are your ears burning, darling?" Kathy said as she kissed me. "Should they be? I'm telling the girls all about you." "Ah, should I leave?" "Don't be silly. Sit down. It's perfect timing. I've just got to how we met." I sat down and Kathy continued her story. It was a story she enjoyed telling. She occasionally glanced in my direction and smiled as if to include me, but the gesture was perfunctory, for this was her tale, not mine. I was sitting at the bar when he finally showed up, at last, when I'd given up hope of ever finding him. In he walked, the man of my dreams. Better late than never. I thought I was going to be married by the time I was 25, you know. By 30, I was going to have 2 kids, small dog, big mortgage. But here I was, 33-ish, and things hadn't quite gone to plan. Kathy said this with an arch smile and winked at the girls. Anyway, I was seeing this Australian guy called Daniel, but he didn't want to get married or have kids anytime soon, so I knew I was wasting my time. And we were out one night when suddenly it happened. Mr. Wright walked in. Kathy looked at me and smiled and rolled her eyes, with his girlfriend. This part of the story needed careful handling to retain her audience's sympathy. Kathy and I were both dating other people when we met. Double infidelity isn't the most attractive or auspicious start to a relationship, particularly as we were introduced to each other by our then partners. They knew each other for some reason. I can't remember the precise details. Marianne had once gone out with Daniel's flatmate possibly, or the other way around. I don't remember exactly how we were introduced, but I do remember the first moment I saw Kathy. It was like an electric shock. I remember her long black hair, piercing green eyes, her mouth. She was beautiful, exquisite, an angel. At this point in telling her tale, Kathy paused and smiled and reached for my hand. "Remember, Theo, how we got talking? You said you were training to be a shrink, and I said I was nuts, so it was a match made in heaven." This got a big laugh from the girls. Kathy laughed too and glanced at me sincerely, anxiously, her eyes searching mine. "No, but darling, seriously, it was love at first sight, wasn't it?" This was my cue. I nodded and kissed her cheek. Of course it was. True love. This received a look of approval from her friends, but I wasn't performing. She was right. It was love at first sight. Well, lust anyway. Even though I was with Marianne that night, I couldn't keep my eyes off Kathy. I watched her from a distance, talking animatedly to Daniel. And then I saw her lips mouth, "Fuck you." They were arguing. It looked heated. Daniel turned and walked out. "You're being quiet," Marianne said. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Let's go home, then I'm tired." "Not yet. I was only half listening. Let's have another drink." "I want to go now." "Then go." Marianne shot me a hurt look, then grabbed her jacket and walked out. I knew there'd be a row that next day, but I didn't care. I made my way over to Kathy at the bar. "Is Daniel coming back?" "No. How about Marianne?" I shook my head. "No. Would you like another drink?" "Yes, I would." So we ordered 2 more drinks. We stood at the bar talking. We discussed my psychotherapy training, I remember, and Kathy told me about her stint at drama school. She didn't stay long, as she signed up with an agent at the end of her first year and had been acting professionally ever since. I imagined, without knowing why, that she was probably rather a good actress. "Studying wasn't for me," she said. "I wanted to get out of there and do it, you know." "Do what? Act?" "No, live." Kathy tilted her head, looking out from under her dark lashes, her emerald green eyes peering at me mischievously. "So, Theo, how do you have the patience to keep doing it? Studying, I mean." "Maybe I don't want to get out of there and live. Maybe I'm a coward." "No, if you were a coward, you'd have gone home with your girlfriend." Kathy laughed, a surprisingly wicked laugh. I wanted to grab her and kiss her hard. I'd never experienced such overwhelming physical desire before. I wanted to pull her close, feel her lips, and heat of her body against mine. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have said that. I always say whatever pops into my head. I told you, I'm a bit nuts." Kathy did that a lot, protesting her insanity. "I'm crazy. I'm nuts. I'm insane." But I never believed her. She laughed too easily and too often for me to believe she'd ever suffered the kind of darkness I had experienced. She had a spontaneity, a lightness. She took a delight in living and was endlessly amused by life. Despite her protestations, she seemed the least crazy person I'd ever known. Around her, I felt more sane. Kathy was American. She was born and brought up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Her English mother gave Kathy dual citizenship, but Kathy didn't seem even remotely English. She was determinedly, distinctly un-English, not just in the way she spoke, but in the way she saw the world and how she approached it. Such confidence, such exuberance. I never met anyone like her. We left the bar, hailed a cab. I gave the address of my flat. We rode this short journey in silence. When we arrived, she gently pressed her lips to mine. I broke through my reserve and pulled her toward me. We kept kissing as I fumbled with the keys to the front door. We were scarcely inside before we were undressing, stumbling into the bedroom, falling onto the bed. That night was the most erotic, blissful night of my life. I spent hours exploring Kathy's body. We made love all night until dawn. I remember so much white everywhere. White sunlight creeping around the edges of the curtains, white walls, white bed sheets, the whites of her eyes, her teeth, her skin. I'd never known that skin could be so luminous, so translucent. Ivory white with occasional blue veins visible just beneath the surface, like threads of color in white marble. She was a statue, a Greek goddess, come to life in my hands. We lay there wrapped in each other's arms. Kathy was facing me, her eyes so close they were out of focus. I gazed into a hazy green sea. Well, she said. Well, what about Marion? Marion? A flicker of a smile. Your girlfriend? Oh, yes, I hesitated, unsure. I don't know about Marion. And Daniel? Kathy rolled her eyes. Forget Daniel. I have. Have you really? Kathy responded by kissing me. Before Kathy left, she took a shower. While she was showering, I phoned Marion. I wanted to arrange to see her, to tell her face to face, but she was annoyed about the previous night and insisted we have it out then and there on the phone. Marion wasn't expecting me to break up with her, but that's what I did, as gently as I could. She started crying and became upset and angry. I hung up on her. Brutal, yes, and unkind. I'm not proud of that phone call, but it seemed like the only honest action to take. I still don't know what I could have done differently. On our first proper date, Kathy and I met at Kew Gardens. It was her idea. She was astonished I'd never been. You're kidding. You've never gone to the greenhouses? There's this big one with all the tropical orchids, and they keep it so hot, it's like an oven. When I was at drama school, I used to go and hang out there just to warm up. How about we meet there after you finish work? Then she hesitated, suddenly unsure. Or is it too far for you to go? I'd go further than Kew Gardens for you, darling. Idiot, she kissed me. Kathy was waiting at the entrance when I arrived, in her enormous coat and scarf, waving like an excited child. Come on, follow me. She led me through the frozen mud to the big glass structure that housed the tropical plants and pushed open the door and charged inside. I followed her and was immediately struck by the sudden rise in temperature, an onslaught of heat. I tore off my scarf and coat. Kathy smiled. See, I told you it's like a sauna. Ain't it great? We walked around along the paths, carrying our coats, holding hands, looking at the exotic flowers. I felt an unfamiliar happiness just being in her company, as though a secret door had been opened, and Kathy had beckoned me across the threshold, into a magical world of warmth and light and color, and hundreds of orchards in a dazzling confetti of blues and reds and yellows. I could feel myself thawing in the heat, softening around the edges, like a tortoise emerging into the sun after a long winter's sleep, blinking and waking up. Kathy did that for me. She was my invitation to life, one I grasped with both hands. So this is it, I remember thinking. This is love. I recognized it without question and knew clearly that I'd never experienced anything like this before. My previous romantic encounters had been brief, unsatisfactory for all concerned. As a student, I had summoned up the nerve, aided by a considerable amount of alcohol, to lose my virginity to a Canadian sociology student called Meredith, who wore sharp metal braces that cut into my lip as we kissed. A string of uninspired relationship followed. I never seemed to find the special connection I longed for. I had believed I was too damaged, too incapable of intimacy. But now, every time I heard Kathy's contagious giggle, a wave of excitement ran through me. Through a kind of osmosis, I absorbed her youthful exuberance, her unself-consciousness and joy. I said yes to her every suggestion and every whim. I didn't recognize myself. I liked this new person, this unafraid man Kathy inspired me to be. We fucked all the time. I was consumed with lust, perpetually, urgently hungry for her. I needed to keep touching her. I couldn't get close enough. Kathy moved in with me that December into my one-bedroom apartment in Kentish Town. The dank, thickly carpeted basement flat had windows, but with no view. Our first Christmas together, we were determined to do it properly. We bought a tree from the stall by the tube station and dressed it with a jumble of decorations and lights from the market. I remember vividly the scent of pine needles and wood and candles burning, and Kathy's eyes staring into mine, sparkling, twinkling like the lights on the tree. I spoke without thinking. The words just came out. Will you marry me? Kathy stared at me. What? I love you, Kathy. Will you marry me? Kathy laughed. Then to my joy and amazement, she said yes. The next day we went out and she chose a ring. And the reality of the situation dawned on me. We were engaged. Bizarrely, the first people I thought of were my parents. I wanted to introduce Kathy to them. I wanted them to see how happy I was, that I had finally escaped, that I was free. So we got the train to Surrey. In hindsight, it was a bad idea, doomed from the start. My father greeted me with the typical hostility. You look terrible, Theo. You're too thin. Your hair is too short. You look like a convict. Thanks, Dad. Good to see you, too. My mother seemed more depressed than usual, quieter, smaller somehow, as if she weren't there. Dad was a heavier presence, unfriendly, glaring, and unsmiling. He didn't take his cold, dark eyes off Kathy the entire time. It was an uncomfortable lunch. They didn't seem to like her, nor did they seem particularly happy for us. I don't know why I was surprised. After lunch, my father disappeared into his study. He didn't emerge again. When my mother said goodbye, she held on to me for too long, too closely, and was unsteady on her feet. I felt desperately sad. When Kathy and I left the house, part of me hadn't left. I knew, but it remained behind, forever a child trapped. I felt lost, hopeless, close to tears. Then Kathy surprised me, as always. She threw her arms around me, pulling me into a hug. I understand now, she whispered in my ear. I understand it all. I love you so much more now. She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. We were married in April in a small registry office off Houston Square. No parents invited and no God, nothing religious at Kathy's insistence. But I said a secret prayer during the ceremony. I silently thanked him for giving me such unexpected, undeserved happiness. I saw things clearly now. I understood his greater purpose. God hadn't abandoned me during my childhood. When I had felt so alone and so scared, he had been keeping Kathy hidden up his sleeve, waiting to produce her, like a deft magician. I felt such humility and gratitude for every second we spent together. I was aware how lucky, how incredibly fortunate I was to have such love, how rare it was, and how others weren't so lucky. Most of my patients weren't loved. Alicia Berenson wasn't. It's hard to imagine two women more different than Kathy and Alicia. Kathy makes me think of light, warmth, color, and laughter. When I think of Alicia, I think only of depth, of darkness, of sadness, of silence.